Good evening, and welcome to the Kansas City Public Library's online series of signature events. I'm Kaite Stover, the Director of Reader Services for the library. Our guest is Mitch Bryan, writer, filmmaker, and professor of film studies at UMKC. Tonight's program, Cinema in Kansas City, is one of the key events in this year's summer reading program, Homegrown Stories. We're commemorating Missouri's bicentennial through the legacies and works of writers, artists, musicians, performers, activists, and other change makers with regional roots. It's not too late to sign up. Read any $5 and get one of Kansas City Public Library's collectible pint glasses. Mitch, I saved one for you as a thank you gift. You know, when we talk about New York movies or Los Angeles movies, even Chicago movies, we immediately get a sense of place and the personality of the place. But when we say Kansas City movies, yeah, I can see you making that what face. So tonight, Mitch and I are going to talk about a cinematic identity crisis right here in Kansas City. And few people are as well versed in this subject than Mitch Bryan. He has written screenplays and teleplays for 20th Century Fox, New Line Cinema, Universal, Disney, and Warner Brothers. He co-created and wrote episodes for Batman, the animated series, and some of the producers he's written screenplays for include Oliver Stone, Chris Columbus, and Gina Davis. Mitch is a frequent collaborator with Kevin Wilmot. These two talented gentlemen have co-written 5 screenplays and 2 miniseries. And maybe you've caught him in your earbuds if you've been listening to the James Bond podcast he started with John Engel, 007 by 7, which was their follow-up to Alien Minute. Mitch has written plays, essays about film, and his short story, Last Night at the Rialto, appears in the Kansas City Noir Anthology. Please welcome Mitch Bryan.
Wow, that was quite an introduction. Thank you. Hi, everybody. This is virtual. It's amazing. We're inviting you to join us in a little detective hunt, I guess, as we try to ferret out through different representations of Kansas City in movies. Like, what's the identity? What is the Kansas City that's being presented with these films? So a couple of parameters. We're going to look at movies, just movies, not television. We're going to look at things that were filmed either completely or partially in Kansas City, so we won't be looking at, that's 2 reasons we won't be looking at the last season of Fargo. And so there's also some movies that we're not going to talk about too much, but I'm going to name check them because I've got a few clips that I think we should at least look at. But we won't be talking about Kansas City Confidential because there's only one shot of Kansas City in that. There's a couple of youth in revolt, rebel without a cause type movies, one called The Delinquents, the other called The Cool and the Crazy. We'll be looking at some images from them. We won't really be talking about them. There's Prime Cut, where Lee Marvin is a Chicago hitman who comes down to Kansas City to mix it up with mob boss Gene Hackman. And there's a film called Bucktown, which doesn't technically take place in Kansas City, but it was shot in Kansas City, Kansas, and in Kansas City, Missouri. Starred Fred the Hammer Williamson, and had the most amazing shots of stretches of Kansas City, Missouri, full of bars that don't exist anymore.
You want to have a look at that?
So let's look at that.
You put together a really fun montage of that. These are all the films we're going to have a look at.
That's it. That's all you get for Kansas City Confidential. So the Crest Drive-In, which isn't there anymore, but I guess there's still cool Crest. There's still miniature golf and stuff, but I would love to have gone to that drive-in. Recognize that?
Loose Park, right,
Park.
The Rose Garden.
And that guy there, that's the guy who played Billy Jack. This is his first movie, Tom Laughlin. Have no idea where this drive-in is, but it looks very Kansas City. What school is that? Let me know. Okay, so we know where this is, right? This is, they should go all the time. Where is this?
I thought it was the Majestic downtown, but maybe not.
I think this might be Brookside, but I'm not completely sure.
Does not look like my neighborhood.
Prime Cut gives us some epic shots of the cattle yards that are no longer there. A wonderful Kansas City Royals ball cap on a homicidal slaughterhouse worker. very rainy West Bottoms here.
I thought I saw some flooding, but maybe not.
Could be. That would not be uncommon in the West Bottoms. And then I think, last but not least, are a few shots from Bucktown. I just wish I could go to all of these bars. They're all gone. I think that these are where Barney Alice Plaza is, I think, now. So there you go. There's our quick trip down memory lane of movies we're not going to talk about. But we are going to talk about 3 films. We'll get to those in a minute. First, let's do geography, shall we?
Let's do the
Let's
numbers.
Okay,
We have
so
some interesting numbers here. So there are many Kansas cities. This is a general city map, and 2 states. 2 states and 9 counties. According to Mark, there's a plus. It can go up to 15 counties depending on the research you care to cite. And then, wow, it's a mess, Mitch.
That's exactly right. So this is the conversation that I have had many, many times. I tell somebody I'm from Kansas City, they say, oh, Kansas City, Missouri, or Kansas City, Kansas? And I think, wow, they know what they're talking about. I go, oh, do you know Kansas City? And then they say, well, no, I just know that there's a Kansas City, Kansas, and a Kansas City, Missouri. So where do you live? And then I have to try to explain how I live in Kansas, I live in Fairway, which is closer to Kansas City, Missouri, because it's right by the state line. In some ways, it's more like Kansas City, Missouri than southern Johnson County, and away we go. So that kind of geographic confusion maybe is part of the problem here. I would also sort of say that the things that these films that we're going to look at do have in common, besides the Kansas City setting, is they were all made in the 90s. They were made by filmmakers who were committed to shooting in Kansas City. They were helped by the fact that there were tax incentives, production incentives that used to exist that helped to lure filmmakers into the area. All of these films, these 3 that we're going to look at, kind of require repeated viewing because they are all obsessed with small details. And maybe in these small details are clues to what is an identity of Kansas City that is sort of revealed in these films.
So what are the 3 we're going to look at?
So we're going to look at Ride with the Devil, we're going to look at Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, and we're going to look at Robert Altman's Kansas City.
Until you had picked those films, I had not seen any of them. I knew of them, but I hadn't seen any of them. So it was a real delight to go through and, I guess, binge watch as much as you can binge watch these films and look for what it is these movies are saying about Kansas City that I could identify. I'm just your general lay viewer of movies. And I kept looking for what is particularly Kansas City, Missouri in Ride with the Devil and Mr. and Mrs. Bridge and Kansas City. And they were all fun to watch and fun to think about. And I think we're gonna have a fun conversation about that.
And they're all period films, which is another thing that is sort of interesting. Why is it that we don't have a contemporary film set in Kansas City? And what is it that creates an even more complex conversation when we're making period films? Because obviously hopefully they require a knowledge of the setting of the time that they take place, and that has to be communicated to the audience. They're going to oscillate between the specific details of the period and hopefully the universal thing. Like, why are we watching this movie that takes place in the 1860s? What does it matter to my life today, or in the 1930s? So all of these period films oscillate between the specific period detail and the universal themes. And then there's this whole thing where I have this theory that movies exist in 3 time periods, that when the movie is set, when the movie is made, and when the movie is received. And obviously we received the movie Ride with the Devil. We may have seen it when it came out in 1999, and you and I just watched it over the last couple of weeks. So something we've changed, our life has changed, the world has changed, how we watch movies has changed. So that is constantly in a state of flux, and that is something that makes all 3 of these movies really interesting, because they were all made in the 90s. So they were made in a different time, and they're all about a different time, and we're receiving them now, not when they were made, but now, in 2021. So with Ride with the Devil, and I'm talking about this restored version that you can get from the Criterion Collection. It's the original cut that Ang Lee wanted to release, but he was kind of talked into cutting it down, and at the end it didn't really help because the movie didn't do particularly well at the box office, and he was able to put this stuff back in, and it makes it a much better movie, so that's the version you should watch. It's a movie that looks like a Western, but it isn't, so that creates some issues, right? Or how you're going to receive the movie, like what genre am I in? It's a movie that is really a war film, specifically an anti-war film, so that's going to present different pleasures than, believe it or not, there's a difference between a war film and an anti-war film, and there's a difference between a Midwestern set in the 1850s, early 1860s, and a traditional Western that usually takes place after the Civil War. And it's a story of these friends, these southern Missourians who are bushwhackers, and it starts with the tensions in Bleeding Kansas, and it goes all the way through the Civil War and after. And the historical complexities of this region are almost as messy as the geographic ones. You know, like, who are the bushwhackers? Who are the Jayhawkers? Missouri is not a part of the Confederacy, but it's a slave state, so technically it's a Union state. Like, so there's all of these nuances that are part of Ride with the Devil that make it really hard to get a hold of, and they are embodied in the main character, who is a German immigrant son who thinks of himself as a Southerner, but really isn't. He's really more allied with the North. So it's not the easiest movie to get hold of.
No,
right?
I was confused. I felt that conundrum while I was watching that movie. I kept thinking, I'm not sure what side our main characters are on. I'm not certain who's where. It didn't feel as if their loyalties flip-flopped, but it felt as if they were all questioning their values and their beliefs, and then they would put it aside, because to do that was just getting a little too confusing for them as well. So frequently I would get mixed up with, wait a minute, who's good, who's evil in this film? And it turns out there's no good, there's no evil at all.
Right. James Schamus, the writer, said that the whole point of the movie is that you don't know who to root for. Well, so when a movie says that, does that, presents itself that way to you, it can be really confusing. And this is one of those movies that does get better every time I watch it, but I still think it's difficult to get hold of. In some ways, I feel like the filmmakers know more about the history of the region than the audience does, and they're not really letting us in on a lot of it. And so it makes it a really slippery movie to get hold of.
Even the characters, they would do things that make me think, okay, I can root for this character. Tobey Maguire's character, you want to root for that character. And then his character turns around and does something horrible. He's polite to the woman who's serving him food, and then he turns around and threatens to kill her husband and son. And you're just wondering, like, where'd that come from? What? Like, I'm confused again while I'm watching this movie, and that's okay. So let's have a look then.
Yeah. So this clip
Look at this one.
it's a good example. This is a scene that actually isn't in the book. It was written by James Schamus, and that's one thing that makes it interesting. The ideas that are being espoused over the dinner table by this Southerner, as he's assessing and describing what's going on in Lawrence, Kansas, are he seems to have figured this out, and he's not the least bit happy about it, you know. And it's so, again, this kind of ambivalence is just, the scene is shot through with it.
So we're having a look at Ride with the Devil.
You ever been to Lawrence, Kansas, young man?
No, I reckon not, Mr. Evans. Don't believe I'd be too welcome in Lawrence.
I didn't think so. Before this war began, my business took me there often. And as I saw those Northerners build that town, I witnessed the seeds of our destruction being sown.
And the founding of that town was truly the beginning of the Yankee invasion.
I'm not speaking of numbers, nor even abolitionist troublemaking. It was the schoolhouse. Before they built their church even, they built that schoolhouse. And they lettered every tailor's son and every farmer's daughter in that country.
Spelling won't help you hold a plow any firmer. Or a gun either.
No, it won't, Mr. Childs, but my point is merely that they rounded every pup up into that schoolhouse because they fancied that everyone should think and talk the same free-thinking way they do. With no regard to station, custom, propriety. And that is why they will win, because they believe everyone should live and think just like them. And we shall lose because we don't care one way or another how they live. We just worry about ourselves.
Are you saying, sir, that we fight for nothing?
Far from it, Mr. Childs. You fight for everything that we ever had, as did my son. It's just that we don't have it anymore.
You know, one of the things that's so interesting about this movie is that the big set piece in the middle of the film is the recreation of Quantrell's raid on Lawrence. And so all of these, you know, disenfranchised Southerners ride on Lawrence, the abolitionist stronghold, seeking revenge for members of Quantrell's family who had died in a collapse in a jail. And they went into the town, and the intention was to kill every man in Lawrence, and they did a pretty good job of that. And to watch it now in the wake of January 6th, there's this iconography. Like there's one scene where there's like a American flag that's tied to the tail of a horse that's being dragged through the middle of the street, and all of these vignettes that are in the raid of Lawrence are all from historical accounts. So it's very historically accurate. And so talk about like that oscillation between the specific period historical detail, and then you look at it and you're kind of like, oh my God, that kind of looks like something that just happened, you know? And it's a really amazing thing where this movie now exists for me differently than it existed when I saw it in, you know, 1999 or even 2005.
And this scene we just saw, I found a little confusing because I know that the old Southern gentleman is watching his old world crumble around him, but the way he talks about education, he makes it sound like brainwashing.
Yeah.
And
because he says it's regardless of station. He says that in complete contempt, right? So he believes in a world where, you know, people have different places in the society. It's a caste system, and and he wants that kind of caste system, and that he's so appalled by the fact that there might be teaching people of all stripes, you know, to.
for a moment while I was watching that scene, I thought, oh my God, what if it's just brainwashing one way of thinking, and the confusion we talk about with Ride with the Devil, I felt it for just a moment. I thought, I'm not certain how I'm supposed to feel about this scene.
Right.
And I've watched it over and over, and it's making a little more sense. So I'm seeing what you're seeing, but I can't shake the idea that, oh, maybe they're not treating education as learning more and expanding your world, but more as indoctrination.
Right.
And
it's wicked. It's terrifying, you know.
Right.
And he says it with such conviction, and yet he says we're going to lose. Like they're going to win with that strategy. So he may well be mischaracterizing the education, but the way that is the way he sees it, and that's where the film is so interesting, and how it really does try to give some kind of point of view consideration to another point of view, to create this morass of moral ambiguity.
you said it wasn't a Western, and yet I felt sometimes as if it were acting like a Western.
Well, it's trading in the iconography of a Western. You got guys on horsebacks, and you got people wearing guns, and you got, but it doesn't do the things that Westerns do. It doesn't have a stalwart hero. It has a very confused hero. It doesn't have a clearly defined bad guy It doesn't have a shootout against that bad guy at the end where the good guy triumphs. The real Western in Ride with the Devil is the very last scene where Jeffrey Wright's character, Holt, who is a former slave and who's been fighting for the South in one more turn of this moral ambiguity, he rides off into the sunset. And he's the Western character who's going on the quest. And so in a way, the only thing that's truly Western about it is the very last scene, because all of the other things that you expect from a Western, the movie goes out of its way to not give you.
And even for an anti-war film, it doesn't end like a typical anti-war film. What's the last act? You said it all happens in a domestic setting. It's the last act of this movie is about a wedding.
About people sitting around in a room deciding who's going to marry who and what are they going to do with their lives and what choices are they going to make. And it's an Ang Lee movie at that point. It is Sense and Sensibility or The Ice Storm, where he is a gifted director of the domestic setting. And the fact that it comes at the last 30 minutes of the film is confounding. And it's kind of like, movies aren't supposed to end this way. They're not supposed to slow down at the end. And so again, it's a challenging movie, but like all of these, I think you're rewarded if you revisit it.
So what did we learn about Kansas City from watching Ride with the Devil?
So what we learn about the Kansas City that's represented in Ride with the Devil, and you'll have to tell me whether this is our Kansas City, but this is, in this movie, everybody seems to have their own tribe, their own little group that they belong to. It's confusing to know who believes what, who's from where, who, so that's confusing. Mostly white people. There's only one black character in this film, and he's allied with a side that you would not expect. And so I've always struggled with the racial aspect of this story, given that it's Bleeding Kansas, given that it's the fight over slavery, given it's all of those things. Then you've got one black character, and who's a Southerner, and it's kind of like, I don't know what that says about I don't know what that says or means beyond just that one very particular character. Well, I don't know what it says. That's what it says about their world. I don't know how much of that has anything to do with the world that we live in.
I think that film presents the idea that everything is complicated, and it's not as cut and dried.
So is Kansas City complicated, and you have to know a lot more about Kansas City to figure out what to make of Kansas City?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. So what do we have up? Where does Mr. and Mrs. Bridge fit?
So where is Mr. Well, we've gone from this domestic third act of that's quiet and about people sitting in rooms together, and in that sense, that connects up with Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, which is this story of this traditionally minded country club plaza style family in the 1930s. We're back in the 30s. Mr. Bridge holds some pretty amazing views about the world. He says when he sees a painter or a portrait artist doing it, says, why doesn't he have a job and just do that on the weekends? He says that he's a lawyer, he himself is a lawyer, turned out to be a lawyer, not a poet. And he says that psychiatric analysis is on a par with fortune telling and dice or something like that. So he's a very rigid figure, and his wife is this sort of always trying to be a Pollyanna, always trying to see the positive side of things. And their family is sort of falling apart under this kind of rigidity. Their kids are growing up, and they're not becoming clones of their parents, right? So that's a major tension. This is a Merchant Ivory production. So we think about Merchant Ivory, we think of A Room with a View and Howard's End. One critic said that the elements that you always find with Merchant Ivory is they're period pieces, usually in the early 20th century. They're usually in England. They're dealing with genteel social rules and traditions, right? And so in many ways, that all fits. It just happens that it's Kansas City, and it's Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. It's not, Anthony Hopkins or whoever would normally be in the... Emma Thompson, right. So it's a film about repression, which Merchant Ivory does really well, and rigidity, and a way of life that arguably doesn't exist anymore.
And is there a storyline?
That I don't know. I don't know whether it's even a movie, because like the books, it's a series of vignettes. It's a series of small scenes that span over, 10 years and from 2 books. And so it is also kind of this patchwork of events, but it's not unified really by anything the way that, as we'll see with Kansas City. Kansas City will be unified by one 24-hour period, right? This isn't unified that way, and so it's a harder movie, I think, to kind of find your way through.
I was able to go with the unusual flow of Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, but I have to say that this movie did make me tense while I was watching it. And I know I'm watching it through a far more modern lens now. I'm watching it in light of the Me Too movement. I'm watching it in light of women's rights. And there's times, the time I felt the most tension is the scene that you chose to show us this evening. And while I felt a lot of tension while I was watching Ride with the Devil, because there were lots of violent scenes that made me get brought up. This particular scene, I think, had me yelling and just very, very angry, Mitch. So
yeah, that's why I picked it. So to make you mad. So here we are at a country club at dinner, and there's a tornado on the way.
And I'm going to cue this up and be very quiet, and we can watch me blow up afterwards.
Is there any more news?
Mr. Bridge, the club prefers that everyone go to the basement immediately. Please.
Wait. Oh. Oh. Where are the Bridges?
He won't retreat. He doesn't know the meaning of the word. He's like one of Napoleon's 14-year-old foot soldiers.
You should just hit him over the head and leave.
We leave 3 weeks from today.
Why, Walter Bridge.
First England, then France, then Italy. They never give you enough butter around this place.
Mine's all gone. I'll see if I can steal some for you.
Any luck?
Yes. There's some here.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So, from Rome, we go to Florence, and from Florence to Venice.
Walter, don't you think we might be better off downstairs in the basement?
India? Now look here. For 20 years, I've been telling you when something will happen and when it will not happen. Now, have I ever, on any significant occasion, been proved wrong?
So Katie, why does that make you so mad?
Okay, well, give me a minute to put my eyeballs back in my head, okay? So many things in that scene that irritate me. Well, they're in the middle of this. He's so unobservant of how upset she is. He's so uncaring about the staff at this country club restaurant. Paul Newman's Mr. Bridge just wants to sit there. This is a man who thinks he can defy God and the weather. And then, in the middle of defying God and the weather, and we all know people who will do that, he's dismissive and belittling of his wife's agitation, and then presents her with this gorgeous gift, this marvelous gift. She thanks him by fetching butter. Will you just stop me?
Thanks
Mitch, will
him
you
by
just stop
fetching
me
the
now?
butter. I know. Let me see if I can find steal some butter for you, she says. You know, and then he catches this break because the lights come back on.
Oh,
and
that was so...
And he's vindicated, you know, and it is. It's
For 20 years, he's been right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'll stop now.
So, yeah, no, it's so frustrating. And James Ivory, the director, said that he really remembered this kind of world, and apparently Joanne Woodward, Paul Newman did as well. But yet, they showed this movie to test audiences several generations removed, and they were like, why are these people acting like this? Like they didn't get it. And so that makes me wonder, does the film communicate properly? Like, how am I supposed to feel about this movie? Am I supposed to feel like, oh, it's really great, things aren't like that anymore? Or am I supposed to feel like, oh, there's still people that are kind of like that? Or am I supposed to think, as I kind of do, these people I don't want to hang out with them. They don't fascinate me. They're not particularly entertaining. That's probably the most entertaining scene in the movie. And so why would I want to spend 2 hours watching a movie about them? Maybe I can read those books and take a break from them, or maybe bring my own kind of, I have to visualize that, I have to bring my own attitudes. Maybe Evan S. Cannell's voice is more clearly satirical in his descriptions of these people, whereas in the movie you just have to look at it. So I don't know. I find it, of the three movies, I find it to be the most difficult to get hold of, and maybe even a little boring.
Is it possible that the director is just sort of polishing his memory? I mean, he says that he remembers living like this, and the Newmans say they remember living like this. Did that time just get an extra sheen from them? Are they making a movie about about nostalgia? About what they thought was great about that time?
I find it all really
was not great.
I find it all really creepy. I find like the world that is presented creepy. I find the people creepy. I'm so glad I don't live in that reality. So I don't know. I can't get there. And the movie doesn't bring me into it in any way beyond me just saying these are like really creepy
What was
people.
creepy for you? What scenes were creepy?
Just how repressed everybody is, and how rigid everyone is, and how no one communicates or talks to each other. And it's just that kind of suffocating wasp white world.
This kind of ties into your remark about the tribes that you talked about, the tribes of people in Ride with the Devil.
And this is about a very specific small tribe of Kansas City, which is the richest of the rich, the whitest of the white. Because there are no people of color in this movie except for servants and jazz musicians. And so again, it's kind of like, all right, what am I supposed to understand about that world or more? And then to ask the question we're asking tonight, what do we understand about our own world? Are there still people like the Bridges? Maybe. I don't know them, but maybe. Maybe Kansas City is enough insulated that it can still really have that kind of, repressed, wealthy, upper class, upper crust. I don't know. I really don't know.
You know what else we learned? Kansas City has tornadoes.
Kansas City has tornadoes. We do learn that. And that they don't have enough of a budget to do anything except get stock footage of tornadoes, because they had no money to make the movie. We'll give them credit. They did a lot with a little. And people gave them so much stuff to make this movie. People really wanted to see this movie made. And they did an incredible feat by being able to pull the movie off for as little money as they had.
So people wanted to see this movie made. That's not the case with the last one, Kansas City, Robert Altman's film, is it?
Well, no, everybody wanted to see it made. Everybody was really, really helpful, and it was everybody who worked on the movie that I know had an extraordinary experience. The problem was when the movie came out, I think there were a lot of people that were really disappointed with the film because it wasn't what they expected it was going to be. And that's fascinating to me because I think of all these movies, it's the best one, and it's the one that gets better every time you watch it, and is the one that gets better with age, and is really, if I had to I would put it in the top 5 Robert Altman movies of his career. And I don't think anybody saw it that way when it came out, but I think when you look at it now, It's this amazing patchwork quilt of different, different things going on, and typical Altman style, like with Nashville, in a 24-hour period. We're back to the 1930s again. What is it with the 1930s in Kansas City? The wettest city in the world, in the West. There was machine politics that kept it kind of depression-proof. There was music happening like crazy. So there were a lot of things that Kansas City was famous for in the 1930s, the Paris of the Plains. And this, but it was also separated, tribal. There were so many different groups of people, go to Kansas City, Kansas, and look at all the different churches, right? Croatian churches, Serbian churches, Greek Orthodox, Irish, Italian, German, Jews, Hispanics, African Americans. Like, Kansas City is an amazing melting pot of cultures, right? And so with this movie, it's set in this 24-hour period on election day, and it involves a kidnapping. A small-time crook rips off a visiting black gangster and does it in blackface. So the movie is like right off the bat, he's signaling us this movie is about race. And so this small-time crook is grabbed by Seldom Seen, who's the head of the black criminal world in Kansas City, and is held for ransom. His wife, Blondie, who fancies herself a kind of Jean Harlow gun moll, kidnaps a wealthy, laudanum-addicted wife of an alderman, hoping that they can somehow use her to bargain to get her husband back. All this happens in 24 hours, and in like typical Altman style, it's made up of small scenes, small moments, and they collectively build to create this big, he's like an impressionistic painter, and you get this big impression by the time you get to the end. But it's a movie that Altman himself even says, like, the more you know about the history, the more you'll enjoy the film. That's its own conversation about how much is the obligation of the filmmaker to communicate, history to the audience. He says we're not going to repeat ourselves. We're not going to say anything twice. You have to pay attention and get it, or else you're going to have to just watch the movie again. And he's a big believer that real films need to be watched again and again. They get better with repeated viewings. So that's kind of the setup of the movie, and there's also a subplot involving the election of the day, where criminals, they bring in guys from out of town to stuff the ballot boxes, and all of the violence that would happen in these very corrupt elections that would happen back in the day. Again, right. We think about what this idea of electioneering, how that idea now has been has divided the country. I guarantee you, what happened in this last presidential election is not what happens in Robert Altman's Kansas City, the way that they do their electioneering. But from its very first conversation between a black woman and a white woman, a maid and this gun moll, and then the wife of this alderman, it's really clear that Altman is going to make a movie about race and class at this particular moment in America.
So what are we going to see in this next scene?
So in this clip, Blondie has gone to Seldom Seen, played by Harry Belafonte, to see if she can get her husband back, who he's got on ice there.
This was a chilling scene. I remember watching.
He didn't mean any harm, though. He's just thinking of me. Just dreaming.
Why'd you have a drink, though?
No, thank you.
Come on. Good American brand.
All right. Thank you. My husband did a dumb thing. You got your money back, right?
So,
right?
I got the money. All of it. Sucker didn't even buy himself a pack of cigarettes.
Good. So, can I have my husband back now?
How'd you like it? And a sucker in a box.
Son of a bitch, don't you touch him! I'll kill you!
this is the part that had me chilled the most. And then the band starting to imitate her screams as she's being dragged out of the club.
Yeah, that's great. Altman said that he tried to get the band to actually play dissonant. They were all too good of musicians, and he had to lay that in in the end. But yeah, and all the scenes are short like that. Like that's what's so interesting about the movie is like it really has this cumulative effect. No one scene will do everything that you might expect from a traditional kind of Hollywood scene because he builds it in these pieces. Really amazing, I think.
So what do we learn about Kansas City from Kansas City?
Well, there's separate worlds, right? There's black world and a white world in Kansas City. This is the Kansas City of the movie. You have to tell me whether this is representative of the world we live in today. There are these junior league women. Is there still a junior league? I think there still is.
Yes, there is.
Who are trying to help a young black teenage girl who is going to have a baby, and they're going to take her to the home for unwed mothers. There's this whole subplot that kind of ends with the residual message of well-meaning white women maybe aren't as helpful to the situation as they think that they are. There's machine politics in this film. There is a very specific network of communication between all the different groups, but particularly between the higher class people, the elites. Music dominates the culture. It's really important. This movie, when Altman sold it to the French financier that financed the movie, he said, I want to make a movie about Kansas City with gangsters and kidnapping, and there's going to be a whole bunch of music in it. And he was really interested in the music, and so it's a movie where the music is part of the culture. Are those things, I don't know, when we're back to this question, like, okay, that was the Kansas City of that movie, is that the Kansas City we live in,
I liked that there was half of this. There were two characters that stood out for me in this movie, and neither of them are human. The music, it seemed as if half this movie was these marvelous music jazz scenes in the Hey Hey Club, and then Union Station. So many scenes in Union Station that probably didn't have to take place there, but I loved seeing the Union Station of the 30s.
Yeah, and that building at the time was going to be torn down. It was really in bad shape, and the film crew came in and put a lot of money into renovating the space and showing how beautiful and what it really used to be, and then people started thinking about what it used to mean to them, about meeting under the clock, and it really, this is a case where a movie actually helped to save a significant institution or architectural structure in our city.
Did you tell me that all the music scenes were filmed completely separately from, like, at a different time?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was no playback. They were all done live, so that's not typical of how usually movies work. So those were recordings of jam sessions that they had, and they spent quite a lot of time down there recording that stuff, and that was part of what Altman wanted to do, and he wanted to get these amazing musicians in and try to recreate the cutting contests that they had. Yeah, there are some things that aren't quite the same musically as maybe would have been existed in the 30s, but they tried really hard to try to keep it in line with what the kind of music that you would have heard at that point.
Very reflective of Kansas City's jazz scene, which is it's live, it's different, it's amazing and invigorating and special when you're there to see it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't know, returning to this opening theory of what is the identity of Kansas City? What is it about Kansas City that we see in all these movies? That geography, that 2 states, 9 counties, 120 cities. I think that's something about Kansas City that is going to always be something that has to be overcome, because it's like that expression, there's too many captains and not enough crew members, right? There'll be the Kansas City, Missouri XYZ group, and then there'll be the Kansas City, Kansas XYZ group. Rather than having just one, everybody's got to have their own, right? And so the city is always, it seems to me, has always had that kind of tension, and sometimes it gets in the way of things, and it could be just the reality of 2 states, right? Like Minneapolis and St. Paul, they're at least both in Minnesota, but we're divided by, you know, Kansas City, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri, Wyandotte County, Jackson County, Johnson County, Wyandotte County. The list goes on, and so maybe we're just not big enough to sustain as many tribes as we have.
So does that make Kansas City a quintessential every town? Is that why it appears to have no discernible look or identity in the movies? Because there's so
I don't think it's in
variations?
every town. I think it's easy to make a movie where it can be in every town in the backdrop. You know, we have, but there's just so many faces. I would argue it's more like that patchwork quilt that Altman talks about with Kansas City, the movie, that there are so many different Kansas Cities, and it requires us to look, you know, more deeply into the fabric of the city to really get some sense of what it, and it's hard to, you can't boil it down, right? It depends on which Kansas City we're talking about at any moment.
I think Kansas City is ripe for a more contemporary film to be made here.
Well, you know, and independently there are movies being made here, but as far as big movies go, until there are tax incentives, right? Until you offer a reason for filmmakers to come here, they have to really want it. I mean, they have to really want to shoot in Kansas City when there's no tax incentives available. They'd rather, you know, go to Oklahoma or Texas or any state that would offer tax incentives and make. I mean, Fargo, the TV series, was not shot in Kansas City. It was shot in Chicago because there were incentives, financial incentives to shoot it in Chicago.
Does not look like Kansas City. So, but Kansas City is at the nation's crossroads. So it's you know, north, south, east, west. It's the middle of the map. So what kind of artistic identity can a place like that develop?
Well, that's the other thing I guess we didn't say too. You know, there it is. It's a southern city in some ways. It's a western city for sure. There's that part of it as well. But you do have the whole United States as a buffer, and so, you know, maybe it takes longer for things to get here, or maybe it's harder for things to get out. It seems like sometimes people are from Kansas City, right? They go away and they're from Kansas City, and I sometimes wonder if we're not have a little bit of an inferiority complex. We like it when people are coming from out of town. You know, I don't know how much we value what we've got right here. I don't know. If I have a friend in New Orleans, he's like, it's just the opposite of New Orleans. It's like in New Orleans, if you're not from New Orleans, you're not worth anything. It's like it's all about you. But so maybe it's the opposite here. People are from Kansas City, but.
We have a question from the audience. Someone who does want you to talk about documentaries that have been filmed in Kansas City, like Frederick Wiseman's Law and Order.
You know, I didn't realize that Frederick Wiseman's Law and Order was filmed in Kansas City. I honestly didn't. I did not know that. So.
And I have not seen that one yet. So.
Sorry.
What am I looking forward?
Frederick Wiseman, man, his movies are amazing because he's direct cinema. You know, you're a fly on the wall. There's no talking heads. There's no narration. You're just plunged into this reality, and he creates this direct cinema, this real world around you. Like Missile Silo is great. There's one in at Department Store that takes place at, I think it's Marshall Field in Dallas. It's amazing. So yeah, he's an incredible filmmaker, and he did New York Public Library. Did you see that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now it's all coming back to me now. Someone commented that they remember when the filmmakers were in town filming Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, and this person remembers when Michael Landon was here filming Where Pigeons Go to Die in that field at 95th and Metcalf. I'm guessing you weren't living here at that time?
No, but I know about that because it was a television movie, I think.
So what is it about the 90s that made it a popular time for KC Cinema? Is it the tax
incentives? For sure.
And they've gone away? They've just been,
I think the last
they expired?
incentives that were used up were for Gone Girl. And yeah, it's really hard to convince politicians that they should be allowed. They can do it for buildings. They can seem to understand it for brick and mortar physical projects, but this idea that, you know, filmmakers come in, they bring a lot of money from outside, and they give a lot of people jobs, and it is about jobs, and it is about money, but somehow they can give a tax incentive to somebody from Cleveland building an apartment complex, but it doesn't seem to make sense to them with movies.
Is it because it's so temporary? It's so
Yeah,
project-based?
that's part of it. But that's the thing, is that it is temporary, project per project, but look at once you start making it happen, then one movie's over and another movie comes in, and those people go and work on that next film. So I'm a big supporter of it, and you kind of have to do it. And if you really want movies being filmed in your region, you've got to compete with these other states. So Martin Scorsese's in Oklahoma right now making a $200 million movie, and a lot of that money is going to stay in Oklahoma.
Oh my gosh. We had another audience member say that they mentioned In Cold Blood. This person also mentioned Paper Moon and The Day After.
That's true. Paper Moon, which was shot out in Hayes. I tried to keep this focused on Kansas City, and same with In Cold Blood. Like, they pass through Kansas City, and there's some shots of the stockyards and the West Bottoms, and then I think there's a hotel in Overland Park or something. But it mostly takes place in Holcomb in western Kansas. So same with Paper Moon.
And the KC Museum was a film site for HBO's Truman film, 1995.
Yeah,
Truman film.
that's true. Truman's not really about Kansas City, but they did shoot most of it in the region and created other locations here in Kansas City. So that's true.
So what can we, if we go back to your theory, what do we have to understand about Kansas City in the movies?
I think that Kansas City is as confusing as the geography right now when it comes to trying to find what a Kansas City image is for in the movie. And it may take a contemporary film to come shine some light on it, but it's hard to get hold of.
We have to look closely, as you said.
I think so. Which Kansas City are we talking about? There's many, many, many Kansas Cities.
It's complicated.
Complicated, yeah.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening for Cinema and Kansas City, part of the Kansas City Public Library Summer Reading Program, Homegrown Stories. You just saw 3 stories about your hometown. So check out those movies from the Kansas City Public Library. Sign up for summer reading. It is not too late to read 5 books and get a super cool pint glass. Otherwise, thanks again, and we'll see you at the next online signature event. Good night.